The Crystal Charter, Daughter of the Red Seal. Read and written by Rebecca Sewell. Chapter 4. The day was going exactly as Maebe had imagined. Certainly trailed around after her, while she selected material from skilled clothiers to make several new outfits, with assurances that they would be tailored and delivered to the manor before she departed for Clest. Maebe selected a blue cloak, dark as shadows in the night, embroidered with tiny silver depictions of stars for certainly, at an opulent shop run by a team of tiny, elderly women with kindly faces wreathed in wrinkles. All crooked in their spines from years of sewing, they resembled walking F-clefs. Certainly voiced many timid complaints about the dark fabric, making her look too pale, all ignored by Maebe, who was requesting her own new cloak of forest green with dainty gold vines around the hood. A handful of citrine crystal shards changed hands, and the owner, the smallest of the matrons, who wheezed out promises they would be delivered with Maebe's other purchases of practical trousers for riding within 2 days. "I've never worn trousers in all my life, not even to ride," certainly commented as they left. "It's difficult to ride a horse at flat-out gallop when you're confined to skirts and a side saddle," Maebe haughtily responded. "I do wish I could ride. It does sound exhilarating," certainly said as she peered down each direction of the twisted street with no idea of where they were. "Did you ever practice as a child?" Maebe flung the question at her as she jabbed in the air in the direction they were going next. "No, not beyond the basics. Trotting is so bouncy and it's too uncomfortable. And horses have really hard bites, so I try to avoid them. Big beasts that they are." She beamed up at Maebe, waiting for an agreement that would never come. "If you never practice, then you won't be able to do it. And yes, horses are big and powerful. They're also wonderfully intelligent, and nothing feels as satisfying as training one to do as you wish." Maebe regularly vanished to the stables to take out her beautiful bay. It was the easiest way to avoid her father's moods, and certainly his presence. They continued through the close streets of the arteries, making no more than passing comments on the various shop fronts that rested against the tall, twisted trees growing from uneven cobblestones, broken with gnarled roots of trees as old washerwoman's skin is with the twists of veins underneath. Black and white buildings made the bright outfits of the city's inhabitants bloom like splotches of a child's painting over a finely penned letter. The arteries made up only a tiny fragment of the canted city, but from where they walked they could see the palace looming on a cliff edge ahead of them. Beneath the cliff, the docks of Elpis reached out to Mooney Gulf. Elpis was a hastily built city. The relocation of the capital and crown came immediately after the Witch Wars. It allowed the first human rulers to prioritize guarding from the infestation seeping in from the Blight Swamp, the byproduct of magic abuse. Aside from the mortal-made buildings of the arteries, the rest of the city was stacked high into the steep hills and cliffsides, using artificer magic and their magical construction. Towering buildings leaned in on each other in places, stacked like pots and pans in a bustling kitchen. They were painted bright colours and covered in plants by the residents, in a perfunctory attempt to make the toppling shacks cosier. Huge crystals stuck out of some of the taller buildings from artificer witches who were employed by the crown to maintain the safety of Elpis. Ropes and sturdy poles balanced what didn't yet require the full attention of a magical brace. Behind the stacked slopes of the city, the palace perched on a cliff overhead, a beautiful crown on the city's chaotic face. "Why are you going all the way to Clest?" certainly asked, in an authentic attempt at starting a meaningful conversation. "I thought Sumines had to go south." "I said I'd accompany Mouse. It seemed like the right thing to do after... And I haven't been in years." Maebe cut herself off. She smiled at the thought of seeing her friends across the gulf again. Charis had moved her wagon a few months ago, and Maebe hadn't seen her since. "Prince Mouse does seem nice," certainly chirped. "He gave me a tour of the palace after I lost you when I first arrived." Maebe remembered deliberately leaving Certainly outside a room she claimed was a washroom, when actually she left through another door to find Princess Morgana. She had been shocked to discover Mouse happily accompanying Certainly hours after Maebe abandoned her. "I'm glad you can still be friends with him. I'd be a wreck if I'd spoken out like you did." She bobbed her head to the side in a bird-like motion and peered into Maebe's face as they walked side by side. The glare Maebe offered had Certainly wishing she hadn't tried to make conversation. Maebe inhaled deeply, her mental voice composing itself into a calming whisper. "It's not her fault," it spoke. "She knows nothing about court manners and the topics of conversation to avoid." With a graceful wave of her hand, she directed Certainly to the final place she planned on visiting, leading her through a tiny black-painted door with annoyed silence. They had entered a cramped dress shop with an elegant sign of swirled white writing hanging from the second story. Maebe once spent enough time squinting at the decorative writing to work out that it said "Rose and Lilies." Inside, it only took Maebe a few minutes to select something she wanted for herself, but instead she handed the beautiful starlight grey dress, heavy with sophisticated beadwork of jasmine flowers, to Certainly. "I don't think it's very me, May." A little crease of worry lined her brow. "Just try it," Maebe exhaled, a dance of a cruel smile tiptoeing around her mouth. A few minutes later, and a mortified Certainly crept from behind the apricot curtain in the private dressing area. The dress Maebe had picked was the opposite of Certainly's modest tastes. Her prudent dresses, trimmed with clean lace and wide waist belts. It would have suited Maebe's height and slimmer figure beautifully. The colour would have allowed the streak of silver in her auburn hair to gleam. Certainly's homely face, short stature, and timid nature were at odds with such a commanding outfit. Her breasts were uncomfortably squeezed into the 2 straps of fabric that tied behind her neck and created a neckline to her navel. She kept her elbows pinned at her side as she used her hands to try and hold the dress together and remain proper, hide any bits of skin Maebe would have gladly flaunted. As modest as a feast hog tied with silver string, Maebe thought. Her 2-step of a smile exploded into a drunken jig of laughter, loud enough to cause the shopkeeper to frown at her. Rose, Maebe assumed from the decorative rose petals, stitched across the chest of her dress. Certainly fled behind the visual shield of the curtain, nearly tripping over the length of fabric. She hadn't said a word, but her face had flooded crimson. "Add 2 inches length and have 1 sent to Spesseth Manor," Maebe requested of Rose, counting out more crystal shards from a purse of silk leaves. Maebe was still giggling when they left the shop. "I apologise. I didn't realise it would be quite that, well, tight," she spluttered. Certainly's cheeks still flushed red, but at least she could speak now. "I did tell you it wouldn't suit me. It's far too you," she pouted. Maebe thought there might have been some real anger hidden behind the embarrassed flush. She didn't care, though. Her laughter had put her in a gracious mood. "As my way of apologising, I could show you the best tea house that Elpis has to offer," Maebe suggested. "Is this another trick, May?" Certainly frowned up at her guide. "No, I swear, once a day is enough," she giggled. She led Certainly down a tight, winding street. The ancient buildings wilted overhead, roofs on each side becoming intimate, heads leaning together to whisper in gossip. Signs for other establishments swung in the late breeze. They squeezed past crowds decked out in cinched dresses and short, light cloaks, enjoying the warmer weather. Maebe pulled inside a short brick tunnel, only wide enough for 1 person at a time, and entered a small courtyard. The entrance to a large building loomed ahead, with paned glass doors lining one side of the ground floor. Serving staff, dressed all in black, welcomed customers inside. After a brief word with a waitress, they were led through to the back of the building into a larger courtyard. A small rose garden was in bloom atop a small flower bed, and it filled the seating area with colour and scents at the end of spring. Solanum and clematis blossoms clung to trellises, separating the garden into sections, giving each table a semblance of privacy. The sombre waitress pulled out 2 cast-iron chairs with a floral cushion on each, by a table large enough for 4. A spherical arrangement of pastel peonies bedecked the centre of the table. Maebe let certainly take in the beauty of the small garden and the warped elegance of the wooden building. "What are you having?" "My treat." Maebe offered a saturnine smile. She was just going to have to put it on the bill for the manor. "Oh, well, I guess a pot of tea would be lovely," Certainly said without looking at the menu. "What kind of tea, Cert?" Maebe asked, her eyebrows raised. She took Certainly's hand and walked her towards a large oak dining table inside the rear doors of the tea house. An immense centrepiece of flowers from the garden was surrounded by upturned teacups. Each cup contained desiccant tea: rose, brimstone leaf, jasmine, harpies bloom, lavender, lover's root, starlight petal, mint needle, on and on around the table. Certainly picked up a few and sniffed them, but such choice seemed to overwhelm her. "Well?" Maebe asked, as an invitation for Certainly to request advice, or be surprising and make a decision. "Shall we share a pot of your favourite?" Certainly inquired, with ladylike deflection of assertiveness. "I know just what we need," Maebe beamed, and she found herself excited to show off one of her discoveries from the main. Moments later, screens were being set up around their table to black out the daylight. An opening appeared, and with it a waitress, who set on the table gently shimmering teacups. Then a dozen tiny dishes of different sweeteners, 2 miniature cakes iced with black and flecked with edible silver. Finally, a teapot. Clear glass. Its edges glimmered from an internal glow. Deep in the centre, a whole galaxy seemed to be swirling, a small twinkle starting from the middle. As it was set on the table, Maebe gestured for Certainly to watch closely. She leaned in a little, eyes going wide as the swirling stars started to expand, spinning faster. Maebe lifted the lid to let the glittering steam rise around them, flowing with the movement of their breath in the air. It stained the black screen surrounding them with shining silver, which winked out as it dried. The teapot began glowing, a bright silver light that shone on their faces, all the black banished from the liquid inside. "It's brewed," Maebe said, slipping the lid back into place. "Try it on its own first, but if you want to make it sweeter, I suggest adding just a small amount of honey. That's my favourite." She tapped her teacup gently with a spoon, and the screens were rushed back into the building. "This is Nightland tea. It's grown by a group of moon-loving witches near Lempo. You have to harvest it during a full moon to get such a strong light to emit from it. When it completely glows, you know it's ready to drink. I brought it back 2 years ago, and this place has always bought all of our supplies." She showered Certainly with her most satisfied smile. The last time she had travelled to Lempo, she spent the majority of her time flirting with a human adventurer. He was charming and handsome, and she enjoyed that her father was furious she was dallying with strangers, rather than learning about pelts belonging to the creatures of Artio Forest. The skins of woodland creatures seemed a cruel investment of time, against the soft, inviting lips and complimenting tongue of her first beau, until the dashing stranger took her to a small, witch-owned inn and showed her the Nightland tea. He had explained its growing and gathering in great detail, after Maebe probed him over their shared pot. He got annoyed at her distraction, how her eyes hungrily roamed over his body, then shifted to the teapot. His near-successful attempts to seduce her ended, and she decided against spending the last few days in Lempo, chasing after him, and chased after business contacts instead. She asked the innkeeper for details of who supplied the tea, and requested her father buy it all from them. She never discovered if what the adventurer said was the truth behind how it was harvested, but it sounded mystical enough to be alluring. A giggle from behind jerked Maebe from reminiscing and set her scowling. The sound pierced through her enjoyment like a banshee being tickled. "Lady Neris," Maebe greeted, straining to make her voice accommodating. All 3 of the Starling sisters stood facing them, their sneers painted as delicate pouts. "It's always a pleasure to see the ladies of the palace deem the city worthy of their presence." "I was wondering who could afford a specialist tea. I had to investigate, but I should have known it was you. Everyone else of importance is preparing at the palace." Neris looked down at her nose at them and sent the warmth of anger through Maebe's blood. I heard you were sulking around the palace again last week. I didn't see you, though. You can't keep the company of the true royal family, so you must have been hiding away with Mouse again. The middle starling, Villia, joined in, praised by the titters of her sisters. I was invited to the palace, and if I were you, I'd watch your mouth. Prince Morsalus is of royal family. He was formally recognised by his father. Maebe fired before she could cool her temper back down. Mouse is a bastard. He can wear the colours and represent his betters in an official capacity, but he has no real power, no chance to rule. He will be nothing but a bastard for as long as he lives. I guess that does make you wonderfully equal, though. You really should set that wedding date, Nerys snickered. He sees himself as a prince, with no power, and you see yourself as a lady, without the title. Maebe dug her nails into her palm, but held on to determined calm, refusing to let Nerys see she could succeed in provoking her. Speaking of which, Lady Certainly, a pleasure to see you. She inclined her head slightly. Certainly hadn't got it in her to see the insult that Nerys was offering them. Simple fool, Maebe thought, as Certainly beamed a gracious smile onto their unwanted guest. She's not even a lady anymore. Lady Nerys, was it? I'm ever so pleased to meet you. Certainly offered her best seated curtsy, since Maebe had grabbed her wrist under the table to stop her from standing. You must be taking your daughter out for the day. It is so nice to treat the family to days out. Will you be joining us at the feast tonight? Nerys cooed. Am I invited? Certainly asked with genuine interest. Oh, I think everybody of noble birth is invited to the welcome feast, Nerys offered sweetly. The smug expression, the way she stood tall and peered down at them, knowing precisely how to rile Maebe. Maebe needed to change the subject before she could be consumed by rage and give Nerys more to mock her with. Is this the feast for the Northernlander emissaries? I guess they will be planning to auction off some of the Greenian ladies to make lasting bonds with our new allies. I can see you all wrapped in fur, living in a nice hut. I do hope you're lucky enough to be honoured so. You spend so much time in the south, Maebe, in the company of sailors and witches. It's obvious you know nothing about the Northernlanders. Her face leered down at Maebe, a smile without joy, so different to Certainly's, which was pasted over emptiness. Nerys's was filled with self-satisfaction. Oh, you've been over the wall, then. Care to educate me on all you've learned? Maebe imitated her best court smile. Villia stepped forward. I happened to be standing next to Princess Morgana when we welcomed them to court. You should have seen... Shouldn't you be attending your princess right now? I heard the feast would be huge in honour of such a visit. I do hope Morgana didn't tire of your gossip, Maebe cut in. All three of the starlings wore a mirrored expression of offence that someone dared to interrupt just one of them. Maebe had guessed right, though. Princess Morgana excelled at the duties left to her by the deceased queen, but she loathed the tattle in her court ladies, and was known for sending them out on pointless errands when they annoyed her. The youngest starling, Nemen, flinched at Maebe's words, so Maebe knew her stab in the dark hit flesh. I heard the feast was why you had been asked to leave the palace. Outstay your welcome, did you? Even Mouse isn't allowed to sit in during the first night. They only want to give our honoured guests the finest of welcomes. Seating bastards and common merchants at a royal feast wouldn't set the best example, would it? Nerys scoffed at Maebe. Common merchants. Common! My family is wealthy enough to buy your family's whole estate and burn it to the ground. Hide behind your name. Maebe ground her teeth as her mind raged, but she wouldn't have dared say the words out loud. Her sisters, Nemen and Villia, whispered to each other behind their eldest sister's back, all of them in light cloaks, veiled under shades of spring greens and pink, wide cream belts, a fashion loved by the ladies of green, imprinted with patterns. The flowers threaded into their hair and flowing skirts gave the perfect image of 3 spring fairies. Their jeering, too sharp faces broke that illusion and revealed them to be the snakes that they were. Have a wonderful time at the banquet, Nerys, Maebe bristled. I hope you choke on your wine, she thought. Oh no, you have a wonderful day out with your mother. Maybe she can instruct you on how to refer to a lady, since you obviously didn't finish learning your lessons after your previous mother died. It's Lady Nerys. She strode off back to the building, Nemen and Villiers chortling behind her. Maebe looked towards the faintly glowing teapot, then poured herself a cup. Fury rippled beneath her skin, threatening to unleash itself on anyone. She stirred the honey in slowly, each movement a deliberate attempt to calm down, inhaling through her nose, exhaling slowly through her mouth as she had been taught. The insult to her mother was unforgivable, even by Starling standards. Finally, Maebe relaxed back into her chair. She took a deep breath, commiserating that her drink had already cooled so much. But she took it into her hands and prepared to drink deep from the taste of summer nights, of clear moonlight. "Do you think I can go to that feast tonight? I know I'm not technically a lady anymore, but it would be nice to meet some more people, like you said. Then I can go out with them, and it wouldn't make you feel so forced to take me out with you." Certainly smiled at her, that foolish, innocent smile. "You naive idiot," Maebe growled as she stood, teacup clattering against its saucer. She stalked from the tea-house, leaving behind Lady Certainly Terrell with the rest of her Nightland tea.